Ever feel like you're fighting a losing battle with your own body? Like no matter how much willpower you have, the hunger just wins? For years, we've been told that weight is just a matter of eating less and moving more. But what if that advice is actually ignoring the biology? Welcome to Ask the Expert, the show where we cut through the misinformation and get straight into the clinical facts behind your health. Today, we're diving deep into endocrinology. We're asking, is obesity actually a hormonal condition? And why do weight loss treatments like GLP-1s work when diet and exercise alone haven't? To help me answer that, I'm delighted to be joined by the consultant endocrinologist from the Weight Loss Medics, Dr. Andrew Kernohan. Thank you for being here. So, since you're a specialist in this field, could you tell us a little bit about the work that you do in both private and NHS?
Well, thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be here. I've been a consultant endocrinologist now for 20 plus years and working in the NHS, and endocrinology is a specialty that goes hand in hand with diabetes.
Yeah.
And it's that combination of diabetes and endocrinology that I think makes endocrinologists the weight loss experts at the moment.
Yeah.
We've been using GLP-1 mimetics in type 2 diabetes, and in fact the very first generation of those, exenatide, were something that was purely a diabetes treatment, and that was the first treatment that we had for diabetes that was associated with significant weight loss. But it's the second and third generation of those GLP-1 mimetics that have been really exciting in the weight loss field.
It's amazing that we have this level of expertise with us today. So let's start with the big picture. The first question is really foundational, and it's a word that we hear quite often, but for someone that's maybe new, what is endocrinology in simple words, and could you give us the 101 definition for it?
Well, endocrinology is the study of hormones and the glands that produce them. It looks at conditions where those hormones become imbalanced, either too much or too little.
Okay.
The commonest conditions that are endocrine conditions are things like thyroid disorder, type 2 diabetes, PCOS, adrenal problems, pituitary issues, and those are the kind of the big ones for endocrinology.
Okay, so moving on from the what to the who, why would you see an endocrinologist specifically?
Well, you might want to see an endocrinologist if you had a suspected disorder of one of the hormones, and that usually means either too much of a hormone or too little of a hormone, or a gland that might be too big or even too little. You might want to see an endocrinologist, and they would look to make sure that things were functioning correctly.
People often think of you for diabetes or thyroid issues alone, but will an endocrinologist help with weight loss?
Yes, I think an endocrinologist can be a really important part of the team for weight loss. I think firstly, they can look for the signs of any of the rare conditions that can lead to weight gain and obesity. I think secondly, we're skilled and experienced in looking after the medical conditions that are associated with obesity that cause such a burden of ill health on people.
Absolutely.
And I think the third thing that we're good with is we've got a lot of experience, from using GLP-1 mimetics all the way through from the first generation, second generation, and to the GLP-1 mimetics now. And we can help people with maintaining their concordance and mitigating side effects with those.
Thank you for that, Dr. Andrew. So now looking at the patients themselves, a very common search is, what are the signs of a hormone imbalance?
Okay, that's an important question. And I think the hormone imbalance, in terms of weight, could be weight gain that's unexplained.
Yeah.
And particularly if that was associated with easy bruising or high blood pressure or muscle weakness or stretch marks, that could be a sign of an excess hormone called cortisol. Another, perhaps much more common problem that can be associated with hormonal problems and weight gain is an underactive thyroid. And if you were feeling cold all the time as well as, unexplained weight gain, that could certainly potentially be a problem there.
So that leads nicely onto the next question that we have. Sometimes things can be a bit more serious. And what are symptoms that endocrinologists say that you should never ignore?
I think this is the other side of the equation, isn't it? People sometimes get unexplained weight loss, and that's always something to be concerned about. If it comes in association with excessive thirst, it could be a sign of diabetes developing, and that's quite common in people with obesity. if it comes in association with anxiety, palpitations, tremor, it could be an overactive thyroid. But there are a whole host of other medical conditions that are potentially quite serious that can be associated with unexplained weight loss.
If we move on now to appetite, why is it that some patients ask the following question: how does the body decide when we feel hungry versus full?
That's a good question, and that's been a subject of a lot of research, particularly over the last 20 years. There are satiety hormones and there are hunger hormones.
Yep.
The most common, or the biggest players in this, are leptin and ghrelin.
Yep.
Leptin's a satiety hormone produced in the fat cells, and ghrelin is the hunger hormone. There are a number of supporting actors here that play into that, and some of those might be familiar with people. GLP-1, GIP, cholecystokinin, PYY are all things that play into that balance between hunger and satiety.
It's a signalling process, essentially. But if we drill down into the chemistry of it, what hormones play a role in appetite regulation?
Okay. So that's this kind of cast of hormones that we were talking about. Ghrelin being the hunger hormone that acts on the hypothalamus and to stimulate appetite. And leptin is the satiety hormone, and that similarly acts on the hypothalamus, but to indicate satiety and decrease food intake. Now, when someone eats, they feel full, and that physical fullness can have an impact on their satiety, but it also signals the release of these hormones from the gut that indicate satiety, and work with the ghrelin and leptin to balance appetite and food intake.
Thank you for that. So a big topic right now, which is a word or a phrase that's used quite commonly, is food noise. What's the difference between food noise that is driven by habit or environment and actual physical hunger?
I think that's a really good question. Food noise is a phrase that wasn't used very much before GLP-1 mimetics were around. And I think the way that GLP-1 mimetics work to reduce appetite and increase satiety suddenly freed people who'd struggled with their weight from this food noise. And then when they didn't have the food noise, they were like, my goodness, where, what is it that I'm missing? And that came from the phrase. Food noise doesn't describe true hunger. I think food noise describes kind of eating habits and comfort eating, and how that links in with pleasure and reward centres in the brain. And that's the difference between food noise, which is driven by that type of eating, and hunger, which might well be driven by the hunger hormone, ghrelin. The
distinction is so important that you've just explained there. So many of our patients have been dieting for years, they tell us. How does chronic dieting affect those hormonal hunger signals over time?
Good question. So chronic dieting, and often serial dieters, end up with yo-yoing of their weight, and we know that has significant adverse health consequences. And that's why there have been some research done into this. There's some evidence that the hunger hormones in particular become upregulated, and the satiety hormones can become resistant to them or downregulated in people who are chronic dieters or serial dieters.
So that leads nicely onto a really important question in the medical community right now. Why is obesity now considered a hormonal or metabolic condition rather than purely a behavioural one?
I think it's through better understanding. I think we understand better the hormonal signals that trigger appetite. We understand better that food behaviours and food choices are driven by the hormonal environment that people are living in. And I think those two, together with better treatments, have helped medical professionals to better understand that obesity can be a chronic medical condition rather than a behavioural one. Interestingly, just last week, speaking to a client, she described how she'd struggled with her weight all of her life, and really it was only with successful weight loss therapy, with GLP-1s, that she realised that she genuinely had a biological problem.
Yeah.
And she felt really that for her entire life up to that point that she had been gaslit by the medical profession. So I'm hoping that with improved understanding and better knowledge and about the treatments of obesity, that will be a thing of the past.
Yes, I know. You notice such a shift from, especially yourself, with all the experience that you've had working in this field. For us and for myself personally, you notice such a difference in how the patients are feeling when they're first-handedly telling you about how their journey has been when they've been on a medication like this, and how they just feel sometimes more just now in control of being able to make those lifestyle choices, whereas before it's the whole just change your diet, change and start exercising more, and they're not really given the support or the understanding of actually what's happening inside their body. Now, let's talk about lifestyle blockers. Stress, we know, is a big one. How do stress hormones like cortisol affect appetite and food choices?
Cortisol is probably the most famous of the stress hormones and perhaps one of the most important. Cortisol is, of course, necessary for life, but when there's too much of it, it can cause problems for people, and in particular with weight gain. Now, problems that are just related to cortisol, for example, Cushing's disease, are really quite rare. But there was some research done in Edinburgh that was really interesting, and that looked at what we call high cortisol reactors and low cortisol reactors. That's people who react to stress in a way that produces high cortisol levels, and people who react to the same stresses, but they don't produce high cortisol levels. And they looked at this in real life and with, measuring salivary cortisols and looking at food intake. And what was interesting was that they found that the high cortisol reactors tended to choose higher calorie, more palatable, kind of comfort foods than the low cortisol reactors to the same stresses. And I think there's a real thought that might be a mechanism that underpins why some people gain a lot of weight, particularly with a stressful lifestyle, and that could be very valuable.
That's really interesting to hear about this study, because it shows that there could possibly be a direct correlation between the two. So we'll move on to our next question. If a patient's on a medication, can chronic stress reduce the effectiveness of the treatment?
Yeah, I think there's little doubt about that. One of the mechanisms might well be related to cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and that influences food choices, and it also results in people kind of holding on to fat and calories a bit more than that. It could also be related to kind of, other things like, concordance and other health behaviours and exercise and things like that might feed into difficulties with losing weight if they're under stress and not able to make those lifestyle changes. Nice.
So would you say stress management's key?
I think stress management is important. And there's some centres out there that kind of advocate what they call a kind of mindful approach to eating, to kind of get away from the stress and to try and manage that, and to use that to kind of help people to make healthier food choices. Whether that's enough on its own for many people, I think is not certain.
Moving on, we hear a lot about muscle loss whilst on weight loss medications. So how do GLP-1s impact muscle and bone, and is there a way to preserve muscle mass and bone strength?
Great question. Muscle loss is a big problem for people who are on GLP-1 mimetics and who lose significant amounts of weight. It's actually a big problem for people who lose significant amounts of weight who aren't on GLP-1 mimetics. So you get a similar 25% or perhaps even more of the weight loss, both for GLP-1 mimetics, for people after bariatric surgery, and even people on very low calorie diets. 25% or more of the weight loss can be muscle. Is there a way that can be mitigated? I think that's probably a yes. Higher protein diets can not only increase satiety, but they can mitigate that weight loss. Exercise is really important, and introducing resistance exercise as well as cardio can help to maintain that muscle mass. You also asked a little bit about bone health, and bone health is really important, particularly for people in the perimenopause or post-menopause.
Absolutely.
There's some evidence that weight loss does increase bone turnover, and for some people that can result in accelerated bone loss. Ways to mitigate that would be to lose weight slowly and steadily and not excessively. I think exercise is evidence-based to help prevent that weight loss, and there was a good study in liraglutide a few years ago that showed that weight-bearing exercise in combination with liraglutide mitigated the liraglutide-mediated bone loss, and that was using DEXA studies to look at bone mineral density and not just bone turnover.
People often ask, can they do it themselves? So how is GLP-1 released normally, and is there a way to increase GLP-1 release naturally?
GLP-1 is a naturally occurring hormone in the body. It's produced in the L cells of the small bowel, and it's produced and released into the bloodstream in response to stimulus from nutrients being present in the small bowel. So it can be stimulated by nutrient-dense food, and there's some evidence that some foods might be better than others. Fibre-rich foods, protein-rich foods, and nutrient-dense foods like avocado is an example that's quoted in the literature as being effective. But basically lots of fresh fruit and vegetables and protein-rich foods delivered to the small bowel will enhance your own body's GLP-1 production.
Finally, we need to talk about the long term. So based on everything that you've discussed today, should obesity be treated as a chronic condition requiring long-term therapy?
I think that's a really good question, and there's no doubt that it is a long-term problem for people. We can see that with people who've been on diets and regain the weight quite rapidly afterwards, the yo-yo dieting that we were discussing earlier. We see that for people who've been on GLP-1 mimetics, and when they're just stopped, you're looking at fairly significant and rapid weight gain, 50% over 6 months, 60 to 80% weight regain after a year. That can be quite damaging for people, and for some people there's no doubt that they're going to need long-term medical therapy for that. Having said that, there are some people, and 1 in 5 people after GLP-1s manage to keep the weight off. There's some evidence from related studies that suggest that exercise and lifestyle can be an important part of that, keeping the weight loss. And I think that's a really important message, is that for people, if they can get sustained lifestyle change with diet and exercise, then they'd stand a better chance of keeping the weight off long term. But nonetheless, I think there's a kind of sea change in thinking that obesity, even if you're not on medical treatment, that you need to keep an eye on it and work hard to keep the weight off.
That concludes our questions for this episode. Thank you so much, Dr. Andrew, for joining us on this episode and for breaking down the science so clearly.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for watching. We hope that we've managed to answer your most asked questions on endocrinology and the science behind weight loss. If there's anything else that you would like us to cover, please do let us know in the comments. Please like, share and subscribe, and we hope to see you in our next episode.